If you're like me, you want to get better at drawing heads and faces. There's something particularly compelling about being able to capture someone's likeness and emotions. I've tried various approaches I've found online, and they're oftentimes useful, but most of them solve just a small piece of the puzzle. I do believe that there's an abundance of resources for how to do this. It's just difficult to find out what you need to learn and which of those resources help the most and which are worth spending time and money on. In this series of videos, I'll identify what we need to learn to draw heads and faces, what resources are out there, and which ones are good. Many of the resources I've found are great for instruction, but they're missing crucial projects to practice the concepts yourself. I'll be sharing any of the projects or exercises that I find or come up with myself to practice these ideas. Based on how I learn things, I'm going to take a little bit more of a methodical approach, and I'm hoping that some of you find this helpful. I'm going to start by getting a little more specific in what I want to accomplish. My goals are that I want to be able to invent and draw characters with unique and recognizable facial features. I want to be able to draw the head and face consistently from various angles and different lighting, and I want to be able to convey emotions with these faces. I encourage you to come up with your own so that you can adjust the projects or exercises to fit what you're looking to accomplish. Leave a comment below as to what your goals are around drawing heads and faces. Regardless of what your goals are, I think there are some similar foundations for how to get there. I chose to focus on faces because I think it's one of the most important parts of drawing believable characters. I think that conveying emotions is the key difference pushing something from good to great. There are so many resources for drawing heads and faces that it's honestly a bit overwhelming. I'm going to look at some books, courses, and videos. Really anything I can find. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and there's also plenty of stuff that we could skip because there's just better resources presenting the same information. Before I evaluate those resources, though, I want to dive into what there is to learn about the subject. How do I know whether a resource is good or not unless I know what I'm looking to get out of it? I'm looking at this through the perspective of knowledge and skill acquisition. I understand that there are elements of creativity and style to learn as well, but I'm not going to be really focusing on those here. I want to learn craft initially, and I believe a lot of that other stuff will come with time. I'm going to look at this through two different lenses. One is the what we need to learn, and the other is levels of understanding or iteration through that learning. Let's start with the what to learn. Organizing and visualizing the information I need to learn helps me to get a better grasp on the problem. Heads and faces are incredibly complex, so what is it that makes up the head and face? At the simplest level, starting with basic proportions of the head and placements of the features on the head, and drawing the head from various angles. Then moving on to the individual facial features, the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, and variations in those features. And then the hair, which is a skill in itself. Then moving on to forms, the form and planes of the face, how to render the major forms and planes, how light hits those planes, and the minor forms in constructing the features. And then anatomy, starting with the skull, which helps to define the structure and major proportions of the head. I want to know the bones and the bony landmarks, or the parts that you can see from the surface. Next, we have facial muscles, where they connect and how they deform, and what other ligaments and fats also define the details of the face. And finally, putting a lot of that together to convey emotion through facial expressions, how the skull, muscle, fat, and skin move when we make specific expressions. It would be a bit odd to draw a portrait without a neck, so I want to learn how the head connects to the neck, the bones of the neck and shoulder, and muscles and movement of the neck, front and back and side to side. And then some important variations, including the key differences between genders, the differences between races and ethnicities, and how aging changes the head and face, how skull proportions change with age, and fat deposits move and sag with age. That is a lot of stuff to learn, but the good news is that this all builds on each other. I can learn to draw a head with some basic proportions and accurate placement of the facial features and get a pretty good likeness of someone. Anatomy is quite useful, but we're not performing plastic surgery here, so I can skip elements that don't show on the surface. I do want to know when I see a plane change on the face what underneath is causing it. Am I seeing a muscle, a fat pad, a bony landmark? And how will it change in different lighting with different facial expressions? Now that we've identified what to learn, I want to talk about levels of understanding or comprehension as we're learning to draw something. I've identified 3 different levels, with each one being a step up with a deeper understanding of the subject. The first level is observation. This is carefully observing and drawing from life or reference. If you can get the proportions correct as you're drawing from observation, you can get a pretty good likeness of the person. It's easy to get stuck here because now it feels like you're relatively good at drawing. But drawing solely from observation without fully understanding the form of an object is going to have some limitations. The second level is construction and understanding the structure and form of the face. This is combining some knowledge of perspective with the subject that you're drawing. It's having an understanding of the forms that make up that subject, how they relate in space, and how light and shadow hit those forms. Drawings begin to feel much more dimensional. This applies to both the major forms, such as the full head, and minor forms, such as the individual features. This is more difficult than observation because it requires you to envision things that you cannot necessarily see directly. The third level is visual memory. This is having a good enough understanding of the forms that you can visualize and draw them without reference. This is useful for having a visual memory of the simplified version of the major forms and planes, but also going deeper and having a visual memory of how all the various anatomical pieces fit together. And it takes a very specific type of practice to master. I'm viewing this process as a bit of a cycle. I may start with drawing the shape of the head from reference, move on to a simplified form of the head shape, and then work on drawing that form from memory. Once I complete that cycle, I start from the beginning again, working through another component of the head, such as the skull. Now knowing the components I want to learn and the different levels of understanding, I can evaluate resources based on how useful I think they'll be to me. Most resources we find will focus on level 1, the observational drawing. There are less on level 2, and very few at level 3. This is just because there is a much larger audience for the materials at lower levels, people who are just really trying to nail down that observational drawing. So what am I looking for? Anything that helps to learn the components I mentioned. Good references for those components that make facial anatomy and structure clear. Techniques or strategies that will help us to learn faster. Tips and tricks that give us aha moments. And abstractions. When you're learning form, you benefit greatly from finding useful abstractions. It's difficult to envision a fully featured head in space, so we'll start with simplified abstractions and then work our way up in detail. And finally, most important is projects and exercises that will help us to advance our level of understanding. Most instruction I found does not include this, and I think this is the critical part to improving. The first resource review I'll be doing is a series of books on drawing head, faces, and portraits. I've read the following books, and in the next video I'll go through which ones I like the best, what components of the head and face they cover and what levels of understanding, and which ones you could probably do without. What's your favorite book, course, or video on drawing heads, faces, and portraits? Let me know in a comment below why you found it useful. Thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel to become a negative space cadet, and follow along with where we go next.